It's 1935, and as the Nazis make their first moves on the European stage, the fortunes of some leaders are up and some are down.
What everyone's trying to do is get close to the Führer. There's lots and lots of backstabbing. Everyone is jockeying for position.
Joseph Goebbels is riding high with his Nazi feel-good propaganda. Hermann Göring is fighting rivals and inner demons. But it's Rudolf Hess who's the biggest loser.
The inner circle around Hitler are like cats in a bag. They're all fighting each other, and the man holding the bag is Hitler himself, and he's willingly letting this fight continue.
And now they're joined by a dangerous new player, Martin Bormann. Cunning and ruthless, he'll work behind the scenes to undermine them all. This is the inside story of Hitler's henchmen, the power struggles, blind ambition, and fawning sycophants that would create a monster and fuel the most brutal horrors of the Third Reich. It's 1935, and Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer, is given a request by his leader, a request which he cannot refuse. Adolf Hitler wants him to turn his country retreat at Obersalzberg into what will be, in effect, his second seat of government. It will be his Berghof, his mountain court.
Now, of course, you can't say no to Hitler. When Hitler asks you a question, no matter how tightly you're in that inner circle, you've got to jump as high as possible.
Hess is Hitler's longest-serving and most loyal supporter. As a devoted disciple, doing his leader's bidding is his reason for being.
What you have to remember about Hess is that Hess is slavishly devoted to Hitler. He's an absolute yes man. Intellectually, he's not a complete dolt.
Hess likes to think of himself as Hitler's right-hand man and the architect of the great Nazi vision that will conquer Europe. But he doesn't get that most of the time the members of the inner circle are fighting each other, not the world. And that's a battle he's not well equipped to win.
You know, he's frankly all at sea in this incredibly Machiavellian world of jockeying and positioning for power.
Hess is more of an ideas man, a thinker, rather than a doer. Running a building project at Obersalzberg, even for his beloved Führer, is not up his street.
It's not a very glamorous task, really. I mean, here's a man who's nominally the deputy Führer, and he's been given a role of sort of really refurbishing Hitler's house.
So Hess decides to delegate. And he knows just the man to take the job off his hands. His own deputy, Martin Bormann.
He passes the buck to Martin Bormann and says, please organise it, Obersalzberg, get it sorted.
Now, this is going to be a very fateful decision because from that delegation, there becomes this accidental transference of power from Hess to Bormann.
Martin Bormann has a low profile in Nazi circles and is virtually unknown in the country at large. He is not a polished politician or an orator. What marks him out is his skill as an organizer. If you need a go-to man, Bormann will make things happen.
Bormann is seen as a kind of oaf, as a thug. he is not sophisticated, and there's definitely a kind of class thing operating in which, you know, he's looked down on as kind of rough on the edges.
If Borman were to walk into this room right now, you wouldn't take any particular note. He's not one of these people who fills a room with his charisma. He's not a Hitler. He's not a Göring, for that matter. Nor is he even a Goebbels. He is a quiet man.
But beware the quiet man. He can be dangerous. The post of deputy at Hess's office in Munich is just a stepping stone to Bormann. He does servile well, but it's a front. Bormann is determined to get to the real centre of power, whatever it takes.
This man is completely ruthless, very ambitious, and he will do anything that he can think of to please Adolf Hitler. The man is a complete psychopath.
He sort of looks a little bit like a mafioso thug. He has a photographic memory as well. So for someone who has that attention for detail, there are opportunities to rise up the greasy pole very, very quickly.
And that's exactly what he does. Thanks to the opportunity his boss Hess has unwittingly given him. Martin Bormann understands how important Bavaria is to the Führer. Hitler had first visited the small town of Berchtesgaden 12 years before and fell in love with the area. He had rented, then bought, a holiday home nearby at Obersalzberg.
That house was called Haus Wachenfeld, and he spent considerable time living in that house on the Obersalzberg, and eventually came to buy the house.
That house is now being completely rebuilt as the centerpiece of a massive complex on the mountainside. Others might see the Berghof project as little more than an admin job. But Bormann is shrewd enough to realize that taking the assignment on could be his ticket to the big time. It has the potential to place him in direct and frequent contact with the Führer.
So for Bormann, the opportunity to develop Hitler's favourite place in the world, well, that's a really, really great opportunity for him. And he knows this and is going to grab it with both hands.
As work continues on the ambitious rebuilding of Hitler's mountain retreat, the whole country is also undergoing something of a revival.
Even some of the Nazi Party's greatest detractors would have looked at Germany at this stage and seen what the regime was bringing and looking, well, it's not all bad. Unemployment's falling, GMP's going up, therefore maybe Hitler and the Nazi Party are bringing this kind of economic miracle he had promised.
A new Germany is taking shape.
In March 1935, there were the first television broadcasts in Germany. I mean, there were a very, very small number of people who could receive the broadcasts, and this was a very early experiment.
TV, of course, is a great symbol of modernity, and of course anything modern was lapped up by the Nazis because it enabled them to project the Third Reich as this very forward, futuristic-looking movement.
It is rebuilding, it is regrowing. All this can be pushed out via radio, via television, via film. The point is the message is getting across, and everyone in Germany and beyond its German borders starts to believe it.
And Bormann is determined that nothing will reflect this growing confidence in the new Reich more powerfully than the Führer's Camelot, rising high in the Bavarian Alps. But there's a problem. To fulfill his lavish plans, he'll need to acquire more land. It's a challenge he takes on with characteristic brutality. Bormann visits neighbours with a request, sell up and move out. It's a proposition that's hard to refuse.
Right next door to the Berghof itself is a hotel, and the owner of the hotel doesn't want to sell.
But Bormann's methods can be very persuasive.
Martin Bormann is determined to buy this building, and he approaches the owner. The owner is reluctant, he refuses to sell.
Bormann's response is swift and merciless. He sends the owner to Dachau concentration camp.
The owner comes around to the idea of selling the hotel. Bormann offers an amount of money, which was a fair market value at the time for the building, and then at the last minute, he pays a considerable amount less. He holds back on a large amount of the agreed sum.
Bormann's methods are blunt but effective.
He forces the purchase of land all around what is initially quite a kind of modest mountain chalet, and in order to create this enormous sort of empire that becomes Hitler's court.
As the new Berghof takes shape, Bormann is in his element, driving his workers on and stopping at nothing to fulfill the Führer's wishes.
He oversees this very, very fully. And of course, he's an incredibly hard taskmaster, he's a complete bully, he makes the life of his foreman an absolute misery, but it gets done.
While Bormann begins to make a name for himself, his boss, Rudolf Hess, is too busy to notice that his own deputy is stealing a march on him. And having given Bormann a leg up to the Führer, he doesn't learn his lesson. He's about to make the same mistake again. Albert Speer is a young architect working on various projects in Hess's ministry, including for the Nuremberg rallies, where the faithful come to reaffirm their loyalty to the Führer and the Nazi Party. Speer has designed an enormous eagle to use as a backdrop. Not wanting to take the responsibility for signing off the design himself, Hess sends him to Hitler. It's an introduction that will change Speer's life. Hitler warms to this new whiz-kid.
Hitler has seen Speer, this rather glamorous young architect, and whisked him up to work for this wonderful Nazi project. So for a period, Speer is in this kind of golden world where he is achieving so much, he's so on top of things, and he's in the kind of glow of Hitler's appreciation.
Before long, Speer is appointed Hitler's official architect. He's completely overwhelmed, having come from nowhere to being a fully paid-up member of the inner circle in less than 4 years. After his eagle design, the young star has more big ideas for the annual gathering.
He wants something dramatic for the Nuremberg rally. So he's heard about that in America they use these searchlights that go into the sky. So if you turn them upward to the sky, they look like never-ending classical Roman pillars.
But Speer's ambitions bring him into conflict with one of the Reich's heavyweights. Naively, he thinks he can just ask the Luftwaffe to lend him 130 anti-aircraft searchlights. But he's treading on the toes of the wrong man. Commander-in-Chief Hermann Göring throws a fit, saying it'll jeopardize national security.
Göring makes the point that, you can't just take bits of my Luftwaffe and use them for some ceremonial occasion. Of course, he's just jealous that, that really Albert Speer has risen as this young man, but it does reveal his ego can be pricked.
Undeterred, Speer goes over Göring's head, direct to the Führer. Hitler agrees with his golden boy and overrules the revered war hero.
What you've got is a kind of rather cheeky upstart, a young whippersnapper who's coming in and actually bending the ear of the Führer. And that's annoying.
Speer gets his way, and his so-called Cathedral of Light becomes an iconic image of Nazi propaganda. The newcomer to Hitler's circle has got the better of the Nazi stalwart, but he's made an enemy who won't forgive or forget.
That's the sort of thing that's going to wind up people like Göring. And from Speer's point of view, he just needs to watch it a little bit.
Rudolf Hess's introduction of new members to the inner circle isn't helping his relations with the old guard. And to make matters worse, too late, Hess begins to realize that his own deputy is making himself rather too indispensable to Hitler. Martin Bormann is using the Berghof project to worm his way ever closer to the center of power. And the deputy Führer is beginning to feel surplus to requirements.
So I think this is a really important moment, really, in the schism between these two men. And also, Bormann wins on this one. He's given this huge task. And of course, he does it very well. Hitler's very impressed by the whole project.
Hess isn't the only member of the inner circle's old guard under pressure. Hermann Göring is starting to become concerned about Hitler's expansionist plans as his Führer prepares to seize a first objective, the Rhineland. Since the end of the First World War, Germany has been banned from having any soldiers stationed in this region along its western border. But in 1936, Hitler decides to reoccupy the buffer zone with troops. He knows it'll be a popular move at home and a signal to France and Britain.
It was a way of saying we are no longer going to be a vassal state told what to do under the terms of Versailles. We are reasserting our German freedoms.
But it's a gamble. Göring fears the Allies will retaliate to this blatant provocation with military force.
Göring was undoubtedly correct in feeling that this was an unnecessary provocation, but of course he's overruled.
Once again, Göring is forced to back down, his pride wounded.
You could clearly see that Göring followed Hitler. He was very loyal to Hitler, but he not quite get the point. What is Hitler wanted to achieve? So he didn't understand that. And he definitely wanted to avoid a great war.
But things are even worse for Hess. He may be deputy Führer, but he's not even been consulted about the plans to reoccupy the Rhineland.
Hitler doesn't allow others to be informed who should have known, and Hess is one of them, suggesting he wasn't high in the pecking order. He would use him, but he's not prepared to give him information you would think would be critical to a major minister.
But while Hess is excluded, a more savvy member of the inner circle sees the Rhineland as a golden opportunity to impress the Führer. Joseph Goebbels has the job of selling the Nazi dream. And this is the kind of propaganda opportunity he's dreamt of for years. It's his moment to shine. The troops march in, and alongside them are an army of Goebbels' film crews and newsmen. the first time since 1918, he says, Germans have something to be proud of. The message is loud and clear. Germany is on the rise again.
We see the soldiers marching along, and we see this woman rush up to one of them and pin this flower to a tunic. And with that flower onto that lapel is the kind of the hopes of Germany in what Hitler's done. And this great gamble's worked.
As the Nazi Party takes stock after this first move on the European stage, the fortunes of some of the leaders are up and some are down. Goebbels has created a wave of euphoria in Germany and is in Hitler's good books. Göring has been put in his place, and Hess has been sidelined. But for Martin Bormann, things couldn't be better. In the Bavarian Alps, he's ensured that the building of Hitler's Berghof, Mountain Court, is completed on time and to the highest possible standard.
So Bormann's stock as being the man behind the redeveloped Obersalzberg is a much stronger position than he was before.
Where the old house stood, there's now a new, much more impressive residence befitting the status of the Führer. The secure compound includes administration buildings, barracks, and guest houses. For the German people, the Berghof becomes a place of pilgrimage. Parties of school children and admirers of their beloved leader travel to Bavaria from all over the country. And favoured foreign dignitaries are invited to visit. Among them Italian dictator Mussolini and the former King of England, Edward VIII, and his wife, the Duchess of Windsor.
When you get to the Berghof, you're treated with lots of smart salutes and SS sentries and guards. You're ushered in, it's all very luxurious. You're left with no doubt that this is the place of the leader of the Third Reich.
The whole site covers 26 square kilometres, and below ground, Bormann has plans for a Nazi stronghold.
A vast area, probably capable of accommodating up to as many as 1,000 people below ground in what the Allies believed would have been an underground fortress where Hitler might make a last stand.
But in the summer of 1936, there is no talk of defensive fortresses, no thoughts about a last stand. Bormann has created for Hitler a fantasy rural escape and an HQ all in one.
I think Hitler had this idea he was going to have the Berghof as a kind of alternative seat of government, partly because he was lazy. He liked to run Germany from his living room. All the decisions that Hitler takes and all these plans and schemes are thought up on a chintz settee in his living room. I mean, that is pretty amazing.
And for the cronies at the top of the heap, this is the best of times. They will become known as the Berghof set. But although an invite to Hitler's Camelot is seen as a sign of approval, it comes at a price.
If you were transported to the Berghof after it was completed in the late 30s, it would have been like going to the kind of most difficult and awkward weekend house party you could possibly imagine. Let's just look at your host for starters. This is Adolf Hitler. This is a man who gets up late and goes to bed very late, and every evening you've got to spend your night listening to him holding forth in the drawing room until 3 or 4 in the morning. And, to leave early would be treacherous and disloyal.
Everybody else was bored stiff, but he loved the idea of, a nice meal, followed by a Hollywood film, followed by a ranting monologue that went on till 3 in the morning. He thought this was wonderful.
And the new Berghof is the stage on which the rivalries and intrigues between Hitler's courtiers are played out.
So you're there on the balcony and you're wearing your kind of Sunday best, and then out comes Hitler, and you all have to jostle around him and sort of allow your heads to be patted and make all the right noises. And at the same time, you're aware of the fact your other member of the inner circle next to you is trying to be even more oleaginous and greasy than you are. And so there's almost a kind of horrible, vicious circle, if you like, amongst the inner circle of who can basically suck up to Hitler the most.
And so we've got all these huge egos, these big personalities, the neighbours from hell scenario, with all these people wanting to curry favour with Hitler, maintain their positions, and climb that ladder.
They weren't friends, they weren't personal friends.
Bormann and Göring, for instance, are mortal enemies. They absolutely hate each other.
Himmler hated Goebbels. Goebbels hated Himmler. Himmler and Goebbels hated Göring. None of them really liked each other, except the relationship with Hitler.
And, you know, amongst some of the Nazi wives, there was quite a lot of friction, so some of the older children may have been aware of that. But most of the time, there was this very nice man who would have been called Uncle Adolf, who would have kind of pinched your cheek, and you would have played, you know, with a puppy with him, and actually it would have been probably very agreeable. But beneath it is something very, very disagreeable.
And as the court plays on, the master of ceremonies is that ambitious man in the shadows, Martin Bormann, who is despised by all of his rivals. But that doesn't bother him. He's developed a taste for power, and having gained his leader's trust, he revels in the attention.
The Berghof becomes a place where Bormann really is the person in charge. It becomes like it's Hitler's court, but it's Bormann's fiefdom, and these are his glory days.
And Bormann is about to pull a masterstroke. He commandeers a local children's home and moves in. It's one of the largest houses in the area and right above the Berghof. Bormann had already started to control access to Hitler. Now, he is literally his gatekeeper.
This house overlooks the Berghof, and so he can see all the comings and goings to the Berghof from his own home. He doesn't have to rely on being kept informed.
Too late, the other members of the circle realize that they have been outmaneuvered by Bormann and scramble to reassert themselves.
Everybody gets frantic about who Hitler's inviting to the Berghof, who's kind of hanging out with him, and they want to be nearby so that they can join in and not see anybody sort of getting closer to Hitler than they are.
Each tries to outdo his rivals by displaying his craven loyalty to the leader, the Reich, and everything it stands for. And in this private world of the Berghof, they feel safe formulating plans for the Jewish problem. For as cultured, urbane, and sophisticated as the Berghof set seems, it is easy to forget that on these chintzy sofas, the most depraved ideologies were crafted.
There's a curious paradox, and it's only really made sense of by the fact that there is a new morality, if you like, in inverted commas, a new morality within Nazism, which allows people to be cultured, intelligent, educated, and at the same time espouse those most radical, hideous, racist ideas.
Behind the scenes, Bormann is ever tightening his grip on his rivals and moulding himself as Hitler's enforcer. He takes charge of the Führer's personal finances and the coffers of the whole Nazi party. He says who gets what, and where there's money, there's power.
The ever-cunning Borman, who now is becoming known as the Brown Eminence, which is a kind of vaguely scatological phrase to describe him, is gaining more and more power by having the keys to the party treasury, the party finances. That gives him enormous power and leverage over the person who's borrowed the money.
As Bormann's power grows, the fortunes of Hess, still his boss, in theory, continue to fall. He is the one person missing from these carefree images at the mountain retreat.
You can look at no better evidence for Hess's marginalisation by the fact that he is not in this footage on the Berghof. He is very rarely there. He is not a very clubbable figure. He's an outsider.
Hess's refusal to engage in the inner circle's vicious power plays means he's slipping even further down the pecking order. With each slight, real or imagined, his hurt increases. He becomes a hypochondriac, trusting in alternative therapies to treat his various perceived ailments. His behavior grows increasingly bizarre. Göring, after mentioning to Hess his neuralgia, one day receives a surprise bundle of packages.
To his great amusement, Hess told him that he should use those pots and pans in order to treat his neuralgia, and that he should fill them up with water at different temperatures and then immerse different parts of his body in them. And ever since, Göring really had difficulties taking Hess seriously and really thought that he had gone off the rails.
Hess was a deeply troubled man. He was deeply insecure about his role within the inner circle, and I think that he was becoming more withdrawn into the kind of slightly out there weirdo that he always was.
But one area where Hess is still useful is in nurturing his links with Nazi supporters in Austria, where the party has been banned following a failed uprising. Hess's work as a go-between helps to prepare the ground for the takeover of Germany's neighbour, which Hitler dreams of achieving as his first step to European domination. But when words become action and the operation to take over Austria begins, the deputy Führer is elbowed aside. Instead, it's Göring that forges the way.
Göring, first of all, puts on a massive demonstration of Luftwaffe strength. There's a huge fly past, and they sort of keep coming over and rotating, going back, refueling, and continuing on.
The overwhelming show of force has its desired effect. The Germans march in without a shot fired. Again, the gamble has paid off.
They walk in unchallenged, and it is without casualty. It's an extraordinary piece of diplomacy backed by force, but it works.
The Anschluss, or joining together, of Germany and Austria is Hitler's greatest triumph yet, and the Austrians seemingly welcome their new master with open arms.
Like the Rhineland thing, it worked. If it works, it's great. If it fails, it's disaster. But it worked. It's a bluff that's not called.
After laying much of the groundwork, this should be Hess's finest hour. But when Hitler is hailed by the vast crowds in Vienna, the deputy Führer is nowhere to be seen.
It's very possibly Hitler's way of saying, you are not in the front rank of those who are going to serve from this point on.
On the surface, the Anschluss appears to be a peaceful uniting of nations. But the day after Hitler's victory speech, the terror begins. It's led by Heinrich Himmler, one of those men at the Berghof who like to think of themselves as cultured and sophisticated. He's the cowardly wannabe soldier who doesn't have any military experience to fight armies. Instead, he wages war on defenseless civilians. His SS starts rounding up thousands of Jews and taking them into protective custody.
Jews were being arrested, their property was being taken, they were taken off to camps, in some cases murdered by Austrian Nazis. This was really the start of an open program of anti-Semitism, and it became a model that was then transferred to Germany itself.
But back in Berlin, Göring takes the plaudits alongside his Führer as an adoring and oblivious German public celebrates another great and apparently peaceful victory. Now, far from the horrors unfolding in Austria, Hitler immerses himself in the high ideals of his architectural vision for the Reich. Albert Speer beguiles his patron with plans to redevelop the heart of the capital. It will be on a breathtaking scale, fit for an empire that will last 1,000 years.
They both had grandiose plans for what Germany was going to look like. These enormous buildings, these big domed buildings and these big arches.
And Hitler's going, yes, I love it, tell me more, and how about if we do this? That's a brilliant idea, mein Führer.
Hitler even wants to rename Berlin Germania, the name given to the region by the ancient Romans. The new city will be his legacy to the grateful German people, and Speer will make it happen.
And what you see is that Speer and Hitler are kind of egging each other on.
Both men were visionaries, both men regarded themselves as artists, but then there's a fine line between being a visionary and being a dreamer. And I suggest that both of them ultimately were dreamers.
Their shared vision and passion means the two men become close. Speer is one of the very few people who can bypass Bormann's increasing ring of steel and approach Hitler directly. To Bormann, Speer's relationship with the Führer is a threat he'll need to address. But there's another member of the inner circle whose personal ties to Hitler he cannot interfere with. And that person is Eva Braun. She has been Hitler's mistress for the past 6 years. Eva was 17 when she was introduced to the 40-year-old Nazi Party leader whilst working as an assistant to his official photographer.
Eva Braun was quite an outgoing person. She was fun-loving, she liked exercise, she liked to smoke, and these were all things that Hitler did not really like. So when Eva Braun was on her own on the Berghof with a small number of close friends, she led a totally different kind of life than from the time that Hitler was there. While Hitler was around, which she of course was always longing for, she had intimate moments with him, which she really cherished, but she also really resented that she could neither be herself and that she was hidden away by Hitler.
Eva is kept out of sight, a closely guarded secret from the German people.
It was necessary for Hitler's PR that, rather like Elvis in his early days, that he shouldn't have an open girlfriend because it would turn off lots of fans. And it would have been very, very bad for Hitler, as Germany's rock star politician, to be seen in a loving, marital or sexual relationship with another woman. So that's why Eva was kept under wraps.
Eva Braun may come across as a typical fun-loving girl in her home movie footage, but she had unique influence over the Führer, and the competing rivals of the inner circle knew it.
Unsurprisingly, it seems that Eva Braun and Martin Bormann hate each other as they sort of jostle for supremacy in this Hitlerian court.
And the wives of the Nazi leaders are wary of Eva too. They're embroiled with jealousy and intrigue just as much as their husbands. But they know for their partners to keep close to Hitler, they must ingratiate themselves with young Eva, however galling that may be.
There are a lot of women staying at the Berghof, but they mostly despise Eva Braun and look down on her as an unmarried woman, as Hitler's mistress, as somebody who really shouldn't have any position at all in their view.
The one wife who is not seen in Eva's footage is Emmy Göring, Hermann's larger-than-life partner. In public, the glamorous Emmy likes to be thought of as First Lady of the Reich, a role model for German womanhood. She despises Eva and thinks she is not worthy of the Führer.
There's also probably an element of jealousy because through her relationship with Hitler, she obviously is very, very close to the source of power that their husbands are jostling for.
Even the men tread carefully around Eva and are not above trying to flatter her, as she records in her occasional diary.
Goebbels sent me a really wonderful pearl necklace and wrote, "The prettiest gift I can present to my honored and beloved Führer is this small token of my respect for you."
But Goebbels' extravagant gesture to ingratiate himself with Eva Braun misfires.
Goebbels, with all his brains, is still an impossible man. He still does not know that Adolf hates pearls and that I am never allowed to wear them in his presence. He says they bring bad luck.
Throughout 1938, the jostling in the Führer's entourage continues as the next step in Germany's domination of Europe begins to unfold.
Once the Anschluss had been successfully completed, it was apparent to everyone that Hitler would be turning his attention towards Czechoslovakia.
An area of western Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, includes a sizable minority of German speakers who are already being mobilized to support the Nazi cause. Hitler's plan is to use them as an excuse to invade. But he can't just march in without justification. So once again, he turns to his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, to come up with a pretext.
And this really explains how much Goebbels is involved in the foreign policy and also the ideological aims of Adolf Hitler. You know, if Hitler had decided to invade the moon, Goebbels would have dressed up as an astronaut. That is the kind of person that he was. He was intimately involved in all of Hitler's actions, and he didn't question this one.
Goebbels' propaganda machine goes to work again. He stokes up division and hatred by portraying these Germans as victims of Czech oppression. There are calls for the Sudetenland to be brought into the fatherland to restore order.
He cooked up bogus stories about aggression against ethnic Germans in order to present Germany as the protector of ethnic Germans. So Goebbels very much sold German intervention there as a humanitarian intervention.
Having won back Hitler's respect following the success of the Anschluss, Göring urges caution once again.
His warrior instincts may have been, we must go forward, we must take territory, we must conquer. But he also was practical enough to understand that military action is risky, and you make the bad choice, then, you know, the whole house of cards could come tumbling down.
But again, Hitler ignores Göring's advice. The old warhorse hasn't learned that his leader can't be talked round once he's made up his mind. German troops pour into the Sudetenland, and they don't stop there. 6 months later, they push on and take another large chunk of Czechoslovakia. Another gamble has paid off, and Hitler's house of cards remains standing. Yet once again, Göring must swallow his pride.
For Göring, it was a disappointment. I mean, Göring was, in his perception, the second most important man in Germany. And now, from autumn 38, spring 39 onwards, for the first time he was losing power, not gaining power. So it was definitely a blow for Göring.
Knocked back, Göring has another problem. An old addiction rears its head. 15 years earlier, during the attempted Munich putsch, Göring had been shot and seriously injured. Treated with morphine to kill the pain, he became hooked on the drug. It took him 2 years to kick the habit. But now, another medical problem leads to him once again taking morphine.
Göring suffered some severe dental issues that involved some quite painful dental surgery. And as part of his recovery, the dentist gave him some painkillers that had a certain amount of opiate in them.
He is soon hooked again, and in the war years to come, strong rumours of this addiction to morphine will blight Göring's career, and his reputation will continue to seesaw.
His focus is taken away from the job of running the Luftwaffe, and, you know, he is seen kind of lying on couches in the middle of the day in a sort of haze of overeating, overdrinking, and taking too many drugs.
Hitler's 50th birthday. Everything is going according to plan. Austria and Czechoslovakia have been incorporated into the new Germany without bloodshed. The Führer reigns supreme, and the Berghof set is in party mood.
These leading Nazis all recognise that this is a key moment, that this is a time where you can just curry a little bit more favour, that you can just manoeuvre yourself into a slightly stronger position.
But what present do you give the man who has the biggest empire since the Kaiser?
All these leaders are jostling to give the ultimate leader the best present. It's like a kid's birthday party. They're hoping that the recipient is going to pat their head the most if they've given him the nicest present.
Each member of Hitler's entourage tries to upstage the others with extravagant gestures to show their loyalty. Goebbels organizes the largest military parade since the Third Reich came to power. Göring lays on an impressive flypast of his Luftwaffe. Speer presents an enormous model of a victory arch he wants to build in the Führer's honor.
It's actually childish. You know, it's actually sort of showboating to each other. Look how much I care for the Führer compared to you.
But Borman, predictably, trumps them all. At vast expense, he has built a stunning mountain-top tea house for Hitler above the Berghof. It's later to be dubbed by the Allies the Eagle's Nest.
The Eagle's Nest is a spectacular building dominates the area. It is really the icing on the birthday cake.
The Third Reich is reaching the zenith of its power. These are giddy times for the inner circle around its triumphant leader. They are on the sunlit uplands, and they look to the future with confidence. All except one.
There is perhaps one leading Nazi for whom the future isn't quite so bright, and that's Rudolf Hess. He's been superseded by people who are simply better than he is. Cleverer, cannier, more Machiavellian, more ruthless, and more ambitious. So the future for Hess doesn't look quite so sunny.
But the deputy Führer is not ready to give up yet. A radical idea is starting to take shape in his mind. It's his way to outflank his rivals, win back Hitler's favor, and create a pact to enable Germany to have total domination over the European mainland. Hess's secret plan will lead to the most bizarre episode in the Second World War.